to make everyone Marinda Green. I'm Marinda Green Bartit, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Western Ontario. And I am also the chair of ChLA's newly named or renamed Communications Committee. And thank you all for joining us. I want to start by saying I'm sorry if you were here 2 weeks ago when we had technical issues and we were not able to host, but thank you for coming and joining us tonight. I'm really excited for this conversation. So I just want to say a couple of things and introduce our panelists before we get started. So the idea for this conversation developed out of two ongoing conversations. The first is from the Communications Committee is hoping to organize several events each year similar to this. We hosted our first in February, which was a panelist of self-published authors, all African-American authors who spoke to us about the process of self-publishing. And we are doing it as a way to hopefully to increase awareness of ChLA and to also talk about some of the good things that we do. And this is, as I just said, our second such event. And so this panel came out of a conversation that Amy Muntz and I actually started having on Facebook, and then several other people joined in via the very well-known syllabus swap about the McGinn County School Board's decision to remove Art Spiegelman's graphic novel Mouse from the curriculum. So as I said, several ChLA members participated in an online discussion about banning and challenging books, including myself and Chris and Jamie and other people who are here as well. And that conversation has turned into this roundtable discussion. So I also want to point out that it is being reported, I think beginning last week, that 2021 librarians and schools received more challenges to books in that year than in any other year. So really important topic for us to talk about. All right, so I'm just going to introduce all of our panelists. They're going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up for a Q&A. When we get to the Q&A, if you all can remember to use the raised hands feature. And there are 64 of us here, so if you'll just be patient with me while I try to find your hands, I would appreciate it. Okay, so up first is Dr. Amy Muntz. Amy teaches at the University of Southern Indiana. She focuses on 19th and early 20th century British Lit and YA Lit. She teaches in USI's teacher training program, and she will speak to us about how she addresses banned and challenged books with her education students. And then next we have Dr. Christina Rhodes, who teaches at Shippensburg University. She focuses on diverse children's and YA literature and Latinx studies. Chris teaches a course in banned books, and she's teaching that course this semester. Some of her students are here, I believe, and she will speak about her experiences designing and teaching that course. Third, we have Jamie Benhoff. Jamie, am I saying that right?
It's Beanhoff.
Beanhoff. I should have asked you before we got started. I apologize. Jamie is a PhD student at Western Michigan University, where she has taught courses on banned books, and she will speak about her courses and students' responses to reading banned books. And last, but definitely not least, we have Stacy Collins. Stacy is the librarian for the Children's Literature and Social Works programs and the Library Curriculum and Research Coordinator at Simmons University. She will speak about how book challenges and bans affect libraries and librarians. Thank you for joining us. Amy, if you want to kick us off.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome. It's great to see you. I'm actually glad I got rescheduled because I had a surgery crisis that happened a couple of weeks ago. So I'm here now. I'm super excited. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I have been at my university for 12 years. And when I started, and I'm at a regional campus, it's its own university. It became its own university in the 1980s. But we are serving the region of Southern Indiana. We get students from Illinois and Kentucky as well. We are the tri-state area. And so we get students who are going to teach in Southern Indiana or Northern Indiana, in Kentucky and in Illinois. So we have some interesting kind of things to talk about with, Illinois being a little bit more liberal than Kentucky, right? So this course is English 444, and it's called Literature in the Secondary Schools. We have 3 required courses for our English teaching majors. One is my course, the Literature in the Secondary Schools. One is Writing in the Secondary Schools, and one is a Young Adult Lit class. And every English teaching major has to take those 9 hours. I start by saying that because I have taught all 3 of these classes in my tenure here at USI. And it was sort of what I call my underwater basket weaving. It's the thing you didn't get hired for, but that they found out you could do for free. And they got super excited by it because I used to teach high school and I used to teach secondary ed students. So this course was resurrected. It had not been taught in 10 years when I started in 2010, and I taught it for the first time in 2011, and I teach it every fall. Which means I have changed this class multiple times based on student feedback. And when I first ran the class, I ran it as a young adult lit class, really kind of a survey. And now it's much more about education. I call it the boots on the ground class. It's much more about teacher training, how to actually go into an English classroom and teach. So given the current political climate, as Miranda pointed out, that started this conversation, students are scared. Like I don't know how else to say that. My students are really frightened of being in the classroom. I have had multiple students leave the teaching program because of the concerns that are happening in school districts across the country. And these are good. I get to see them teach 3 times in my class. These are good teachers, and we're losing them because they don't want to be brought up for whatever because they're teaching a book that someone considers to be, challenging. So when I talk to my students about this, and I teach the class in a certain way, that we talk about how to make sure or how to protect yourself, right, when you teach banned or challenged books. And so I sort of have 4 things that I tell them in the semester. And then I have my syllabus I'm going to share in just a minute to show you a few of the things that I do. The first thing I always tell them is that your job is to teach critical thinking, critical reading, and critical writing, which means everything you do in the classroom has to come back to those 3 things, because that's like many of us who are in positions that get challenged over the humanities, right? Like, what are you actually doing good in the world? We have to know what our takeaway is. What's the end game for what we do? So I always tell them, make sure everything you're doing is supported by those 3 things. The second thing is to always, always, always be supported by the standards, that you know the standards backwards and forwards, and that whatever book you are presenting must follow one of the standards for that day so that you are able to support that conversation. The third thing that I tell them is to never teach a book they are not willing to fight for. And I tell them that because they want to teach banned and challenged books. Like that's, they get to choose their own works for 2 of my teaching demos. And a lot of them are choosing banned and challenged books. A lot of them are choosing banned and challenged pieces. So I always tell them, like, you must be able to passionately fight for the book that you want to teach. And if you can't fight for it, find a different book to teach that fulfills the same thing, right? And then the thing that I always do is I tell them to pair challenged and banned books with either classics or with really contemporary writings that happened within the last maybe 5 years. And so what we're doing in class is we start, I'm gonna share my screen. I should also say that we are a very white campus, and we are a very white area, and we have active working diversity committees trying for recruitment and retention of our non-white students. I've taught this class 11 years, and I've only had 2 non-white students in the 11 years that I've taught it. So one of the the big changes, and this is actually thanks to the syllabus swap in the way that you go for help, and they are wonderful and tell you things. Last semester, I started teaching the book Letting Go of Literary Whiteness, which is anti-racist literature instruction for white students, which is a phenomenal text, which on my evaluations, I got someone telling me I should never have taught this. So I think I'm doing a good job. When they're against it, you know everything's going right. But I also teach poetry, short stories, drama, nonfiction, and a novel. And the novel I always do is Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games, which itself has been challenged again and again, because the Hunger Games is a novel that can be paired with every school of critical theory. And so we actually do every school of critical theory based on the first 3 pages of Hunger Games in my class. So we read a challenged book, and then a lot of things I ask them to do in their journal prompts to look at, like the NCTE standards, and look at become their own poet. But I wanted to sort of head further. Sorry, I know I'm running out of time, so I want to kind of get ahead. So what I do in the class is we start with short stories, and I try to, I gave up the anthology, and I've gone to everything online that is as provocative and challenging, stuff that I feel like they may be able to use easily in the classroom, and stuff that they may find more challenging in the classroom. So one of the things we do is how to teach challenging or banned books. So Rebecca Rowanhorse's Welcome to Your Authentic Indian Experience, for example, is an incredible short story. N.K. Jemisin's The City Born Great. How to teach these kinds of texts in the classroom when you might have resistant students and then resistant parents as well. And so asking them to always pair these with the standards. And so one of their things to do is they have to come up with unit development plans in my class. And they have to pair whatever they're teaching with the appropriate standards for Indiana, or if they are a person who wants to go back to Kentucky, they can use Kentucky standards. Indiana does not use Common Core. Indiana has its own set of standards for some reason. But we try to get as much brand new writing as possible. Sarah Gailey's Bread and Milk and Salt, which is everyone's favorite short story. And then everybody's favorite day of poetry is this day, Ocean Vuong surrendering Frank O'Hara Katie, Roger Rees, Someday I'll Love Roger Rees, and Ocean Vuong, Someday I'll Love Ocean Vuong after Frank O'Hara after Roger Rees. And then they have to do their own Someday I Will Love Myself poem in response to that. I chose these texts because they are, I try to get as much non-white, non-abled, everything that's just not white, heterosexual, cis, in the classroom, because their students have not been exposed to this. And it's unfortunate when they're going to go into a classroom that some students' first experiences with Black literature is going to be To Kill a Mockingbird, which is not Black literature. And so showing them where you can, for free, go to poetry.com or Poetry Foundation, go to authors' websites, like Meg Day has her work on websites. She's a deaf poet, and also queer, and doing Meg Day's poetry and looking at their website, really kind of focusing on what can we get for free? What can I show my students that they can then go out and find themselves? So I'm out of time, unfortunately, but what I want to sort of summarize everything up to is that we are losing students in English teaching programs. They are our bread and butter for regional campuses in the English department. They are the ones who pay our bills. And it's unfortunate that they're that scared. I had a student, a former student this year, drop out of teaching 3 weeks into the semester because she taught a challenged book and asked students for their pronouns, and they attacked her on Facebook. The parent sent her rape threats, death threats, violence threats, and said that she was bullying the straight students, and had over 400 responses on Facebook about her. So she quit her job, and I actually had her come and talk to my students, which may or may not have been a good thing to do. but the problem is there, right? Like, and I think that being as honest as possible with students about the problem that exists, where they are going to be challenged with challenge and banned books, that it's most important to really be able to support yourself as a teacher, right? Jean asked, what YA plays do I teach? I don't teach YA plays. I actually teach trifles, and I've taught Raisin in the Sun in this class. So I don't, this class sort of combines YA and adult lit at the same time. But thank you so much for listening. I'm sorry that was sort of fast and furious, but too fast, too furious. But I will now turn over to my colleague.
Thanks, Amy, so much. We really appreciate it. Chris, whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. How y'all doing today? I say like people can answer me, you know. That's how I start every class, though, so it feels natural to do. All right, I'm going to talk you all through, once it loads, maybe. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to talk you all through how I developed a course on banned books for this semester. This course, just sort of right off the bat, is a course that is a general education requirement on my campus. It's a non-English major course, so anyone, right, it fulfills one of the pillars of their gen eds. So I initially chose to situate this course around banned books because one of the most prominent lists of banned books that came out in the last year or so, other than the Texas one, which is wild to look at, and my family lives in Texas, so I feel another particular kinship to that one. Regardless, right, one of the other lists is from York, Pennsylvania. And so the York County schools had this list of people of color banned books, and the school board got rid of them, and then there was a brouhaha. Anyway, this is all to say, as you can see at the map on your screen, that York is in very, very close proximity to Shippensburg University, where I teach. In fact, York and Cumberland counties, the counties we're in, neighbor each other. We have students who come to Shippensburg from York High School. So these are students who are directly impacted by these particular book bannings. So that's what led me to choose this particular topic this semester. So I'm going to walk you through 3 aspects of my course planning. I'm going to talk to you about how I did my text selection. I'm going to walk you through a couple of my assignments, and then tell you about what I focus on when I teach this class. So like I said, right, the text selection was mostly from the York list, but also pulling from the Texas list a little bit. The York list was very heavy on picture books, for instance, and while that would be really great, it's not within my pedagogy to have students buy a number of books. I would prefer that they would buy fewer than 3 a semester. So these are the 3 that I chose. We read this one summer, The Poet X, and we are now finishing up the semester with Bless Me Ultima, which was a mistake, because Bless Me Ultima is definitely the most weird book that we're reading, and so it was not the one to end the semester on. I will full disclosure that and say that was a teacher fail, but I still love Bless Me Ultima. I think it's a great book, and it certainly has some interesting things that connect really well with Poet X and some of the coming of age aspects in this one summer. So for assignments in this class, my screen's a little funky there. Is it funky for anyone else? Oh, wait, I went too far. My assignments for this class, the first 2 assignments that my students have done, the first was a banned book profile, which was essentially a book report about a banned book of their choice. So they had to find the book, read the book preferably, and summarize it, and then talk about where it was banned, why it was banned, has it been unbanned? And I got a wide variety of responses from students in this particular assignment. A lot of them were like, I think what you would typically see. We got a lot of the Lorax gets banned in China and stuff. But students really did dig deep in this assignment. And we're pulling up more recent books that have been banned for depictions of people of color, like Ibram Kendi's books. So that was really cool to see. I think I would likely keep this particular assignment, maybe even do it as in-class exercise, maybe versus a more heavily weighted graded assignment like I did this semester. The next assignment that my students did was a picture book analysis. So I curated a list of banned picture books. I pulled those from the York list. Like I said, the York list had primarily picture books on it. So it was stuff like, oh gosh, now I'm not going to be able to remember. I'm trying to think. I'm grading these papers right now, so I'm sort of in the thick of it. But it's things like Tango Makes Three. A lot of people chosen Tango Makes Three. But in those same veins, right, queer characters or characters of color. And drawing on the way that we talked about this one summer as a graphic narrative or as an illustrated text, we also looked at My Papi Has a Motorcycle in class together. And so they analyzed their banned picture book, not as a banned book, but as a book worthy of analysis. They were pushed to have an argumentative thesis statement, to have textual support, to do close readings. And a lot of them have done secondary research for context with their books. So that's been really, really cool to see. I had a student do a project on a book about Basquiat. So they looked into documentaries on Basquiat's life, which was really fascinating to see in comparison to the picture book they read. So when I teach this class, I do obviously foreground some of the histories of banned books. We talked about Nazi book burning. We talked about Pinochet era ChLA, as well as how like comics in the 1950s in the United States were like viewed as this plague on society. And then we talked more contemporarily about how in the last few years, particularly since 2016, these books have been challenged and have been widely regarded as problematic, even though they're not problematic, because then my life would be problematic, which my life is problematic for other reasons. Anyway, that's an aside. So my class does focus on those banned books, right? So I have, this is a slide from one of my first class periods where we talked about the terminology adjacent to banning books. We wanted to make sure that we weren't just talking about banning books, but challenging books and removing them from circulation. And right, like the histories of things, like that book banning has been around forever. And that book banning is a global thing, right, with what happened with Salman Rushdie and Satanic Verses. Like I said, Nazi book burning. I guess I could have clicked through while I was talking. Anyway, right. But we did talk mostly about the shifting reasons for why things have been banned or challenged, and how that impacts us more significantly now because of the really tense racialized climates, racist climates in the US. But I don't just focus on banned books, right? We want to talk about how these books work as books. This is a literature class at its very core, and I am very firm in trying to convert people to be English majors through this class. I am shameless in that regard. So we talk about how these books work. We talked about how pages have these compositions and these beautiful images, and how to read both text and image and the interplay between the two. We talk about theories. We bring in theoretical lenses. We've done queer theory. We've done, oh gosh, what was the most recent one we did? I just asked them to do it again. Nope, I'm not going to remember. My brain's not going to work. But we bring in theories. We bring in these theoretical lenses. We read Dr. Kate Slater's really amazing article on this one summer, which I would highly recommend for anyone. And right, we also talk about context and dig into what these books do and how they operate and the craft behind them. So ultimately, right, the thing is that I wanted to emphasize these books as good materials to teach, and good materials to research and analyze and enjoy, right? Ultimately, again, as much as I try to convert people to the English major through this class, they're not going to do it, right? They're going to stick to the money makers, which is fine. But I do want them to be able to be critical thinkers, engaged citizens in the world. Like you, Amy, my university is a predominantly white institution. I'm one of 9 Latinx faculty members in the whole university, and that usually reflects our student population as well. So I want my students to walk away from class with a more full understanding of the world and how the world operates, potentially outside of themselves, right? To borrow from Dr. Regine Sims Bishop, I want those windows and sliding glass doors. for my students. And so I think banned books is a sort of edgy, cool way to get into that. So I like to pair those two. And of course, I'm happy to share any materials with anyone at the end of this. And I think I am right at my 10 minutes. So I will pass it off to whomever is next. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
think it's
Chris, so much.
me.
Yeah, it's you, Jamie, you're up.
Clap for Chris though. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen using my Zoom etiquette. Oh, can you see the full screen now? Perfect. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a shifted focus to the students' reactions, but I do want to give a little bit of background about the class that I'm teaching, because mine is an elective, unlike the other two classes kind of mentioned. It's not required at all. I was like free to go willy-nilly however I wanted with the class. They're all non-majors, so like also convert them to English majors. But a couple demographics, they are mostly Michigan middle-class students at Western Michigan here. I had a pretty early career like students, 19 of them were undergrads, and then I have a whole slew of majors. I think one person has a minor in English, but everyone else was no English department. I had one creative writer, but everyone else was like, this class sounded fun. It's about children's books because the class is youth lit and culture, so that kind of intrigued them, and then the topic specifically of banned books also caught their attention. A little bit about preparation for the classes. I did work with instructional designers for our faculty development office in creating the course, and so they helped me create some of these objectives for the course. The ones that I think were the most fruitful for students and the most exciting were they were really interested in how to analyze censorship movements for the underlying ideologies and assumptions that those movements or people have about childhood, and how it leads to banning that particular book. But these are the books that I assigned. They were the only ones we read this semester. We had a whole bunch of articles buffering this with context and support for what is children's lit, what is censorship, what is children's lit theory. And these were kind of broken up more into case studies over the semester. And so a little bit less of like, let's read literature for literature's sake, though I wish I could have done that a little bit more, but more of let's talk about culture and why these books particularly might be banned and what their assumptions are about childhood when wanting to ban these books. So a little breakdown of my classes, we spent a huge chunk of time. If you see that the first 6 weeks, we didn't even get to any literature. We spent the first 3 weeks building a community and generating class norms, like how are we going to interact with each other when we do talk about these censored topics, because I called them tough topics, not controversial, because I think that a lot of these topics aren't controversial, but can be tough to talk about. And so we spent a majority of our time doing that in the beginning, reading what is children's literature, defining censorship before getting into these case studies with those books that we had from above. And then we're going to spend these last few weeks after today just reflecting on our experience of banned books and reading them. I did have two guest speakers so that I wasn't the only one like, here's what censorship is. So I had Katie Slider, who's a PhD in English education here at Western Michigan, and a middle school teacher come and chat about her experience with banned books and teaching them. And then Latrice Ferguson, who's a PhD student in education at UPenn and has served as a youth librarian, talk about her end as a librarian censoring books. So okay, so I have lots of really cool student experiences to share, and I grabbed a couple snippets. So I'm sorry if there's a lot of text. I tried to pare them down to like the juiciest nuggets, but we have these journals called Insight and Reflections that they turn in periodically about their kind of how their understanding of censorship has changed and the books that they've read that day or that week. So this student, they said, my understanding of censorship has changed. I'm not going to read all of it because I want to skip down to the part where they like have a really cool, interesting idea where they say that censorship is about people and companies who are trying to speak up against something, whether it be injustice by government or even just a school district taking away history or censoring it. And I thought that was really interesting because she came in with this idea and then she has a journal coming up next week about how her idea has possibly changed. So I'm really excited to see if it's changed at all. She also kind of had a secondary journal where she mentioned that she was invested in the way that like how people view children. And so she has here that she believes it's then to pass on and decide what their children, or other children for that matter, can read or watch. And she really focused on the idea of like the romantic child and wanting to protect a child's innocence. And that's what the ideology or assumption that that person might have, or that movement might have, to kind of ban certain books. Student 2, the juicy nugget is that they are interested in the idea that we set up these ideas of following rules, that books or media should be for a certain age group, and the misconception that it's no gray area. She thought it was very strict, like we censor it for this reason and this reason alone. And she realized that, oh, like multiple groups censor these books for various reasons that might be opposing reasons. So she talked a lot about how it's a gray area for her, and she never realized that before. Student number 3 is an education major, and she talked about how she's inside that weird gray area and how she has to tiptoe the line, as both of the previous presenters mentioned, of having to like justify her answers for teaching certain banned books in the future, because she does believe that some information might be too much to process early, but she thinks children are a lot smarter than perhaps some of these censorship movements give them credit for, and they're ready for that information. She particularly loved our Holocaust unit and enjoyed talking about the when can we teach this and like how is too soon. Student 4, the part I really want to highlight is this end part where this is because children's books were considered offensive and that they would give off stereotypes. So she's talking about how they're potentially positive reasons for censoring books. In my class, we brought up the Skippy John Jones books and potentially like really good reasons for banning those books in classrooms. And then she also was super jazzed about how like there are books, obviously, that teach really bad stereotypes of her culture as a Black woman, and how she doesn't want to see those on the shelves. She doesn't want that to spread. And so she likes the idea of helping society improve over time by barring those stereotypes from the shelves of children or adults in general. So we have a couple weeks left in my class, and I just told them about, in the summer, I'm going to like host conversations, hopefully with them if they're interested, like continuing a small children's lit group to keep reading banned books. And a lot of them seemed really invested in like maintaining a book club where we keep reading children's literature. One student wants to see if the university can host a banned books week presentation or like kind of event. So I said I would definitely look into that. I think that the library probably already does something, but we can partner with them. But a lot of the students are just really excited to like have these conversations because they think that they're really important to talk about the ways and why they're being born. Oh my goodness, I lost my train of thought. Why they're being banned, right? They think that some of these reasons are quite ridiculous, right? Like my child is smarter than you think, right? And so I'm excited to see how their last journals turn out, but so far they've seemed really jazzed about reading these books and talking about why. They've really fixated on the why, right? Why are they being banned? So. Might cut out, but that is all I have for you.
Thanks so much, Jamie. That's fantastic. Check out the chat, because if your students are coming back after your class is over, then you're doing something right. Yeah. Stacy, we will end it off for us tonight.
Hello, everybody. Give me just a second to pull my slides up here. And then I just need to gently shrink you so that I can see my notes. All right. Okay. So I'm going to give you a lot of information that a lot of folks probably already have. Some of my co-panelists have covered a bit of this too, but I really do want to talk about this sort of shadow issue that's sort of happening when we're talking about books and bans and what the existence of banned books sort of means for us. Okay, so because this panel was pushed back, I actually had the opportunity to sit through a bunch of other panels and talks and wonderful things happening in discussions about banned books. And I pulled this little soundbite from one from a partnership between Penguin Random House and Pen America had a panel pulled together, and Nicole Hannah-Jones said, "Healthy societies do not ban books," and I like that because it's true. Always go for true, right? I also sat through part of the congressional hearing today from the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Ruby Bridges testified at that hearing. Very, very powerful stuff. But the chairman of the subcommittee actually sort of laid out a lot of great introductory work and said something sort of off the cuff of, if you don't like a book, you don't have to read it, you don't have to buy it, you can write a review about how much you don't like it and why, and you can also write a book of your own. And I think this is sort of that secondary part with the healthy societies do not ban books, mainly because healthy societies know that they don't have to, that there are so many other mechanisms for expressing your displeasure, why a book is garbage, etc., ways of impacting the market to make sure that books like that don't actually do well, etc., if that is your goal. You do not need to eliminate the book. Yes, so a couple of terms. So some of these have already been mentioned, but as folks sort of get knee and neck deep in conversations about book banning, there are some terms that sort of get thrown around and not everybody is necessarily on the same page about it, and that's one of the things that sort of breaks down getting organized to push back against this kind of stuff. So really quickly, so a challenge is an attempt to remove or restrict materials, and it's usually based on the objections of a person or a group. There's usually a process that has to go through at a library or school. A ban is the actual removal of the materials from a library or a curriculum. Censorship, which is sort of the umbrella that we're all dancing under and around, is a contentious term, and that's probably the best definition there is. A contentious term. It's broadly understood to refer to control over the production and distribution of texts and other cultural goods besides texts. It's useful to think of censorship as a collection of practices and behaviors that can be proactive, meaning that it impedes the creation of material, including self-censorship, and reactive, which is impeding the dissemination of material, including book bans. Intellectual freedom, folks have maybe seen like the Office of Intellectual Freedom, or you've heard this bandied about a bit. Intellectual freedom is the right of every individual to seek and receive information from all points of view and all expressions of ideas without restriction. I'm pulling that from the American Library Association's definition. It's a concept that derives from the idea that a democratic society is not possible without an ardently informed citizenry. And it's a right that we enjoy in America from birth, right? There's no age requirement. You have it as soon as you appear. And the last one here is academic freedom. Just throw it out there because it doesn't get talked about enough. This is also from ALA. Academic freedom is the conviction that the freedom of inquiry by faculty members is essential to the mission of the academy as well as the principles of academia, and that scholars should have freedom to teach or communicate ideas or facts, including those that are inconvenient, without being targeted for repression, job loss, or imprisonment. And it is one reason why my lovely co-panelists will not be fired for teaching banned books in all these classes, all these excellent classes. Okay. All right. So I've pulled this slide together from a book written by Dr. Emily Knox. She's a professor at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, and she researches, among other things, information access, intellectual freedom, and censorship. So very on topic. She quite literally wrote the book on banning. It's titled Book Banning in 21st Century America. You can go get the paperback. It just came out in 2020. And just 30 minutes ago, actually, she was giving a talk on intellectual freedom, social justice, and censorship. And she's been doing a lot of talking, a lot of interviews, a lot of information output as book banning's awareness has been driven up in the media. Come back. Sorry. Dr. Knox says that book banning is imprecise and a catch-all term, and she prefers to talk about people engaging in censorship practices, and with what she calls the 4 R's: redaction, relocation, restriction, and removal. And these are pretty on their face what you might think of. So redactions, when you cross out something because you don't like it. Cover up an image. Folks are probably familiar with the infamous diaperings of the naked kiddo in the night kitchen. Fun times with stickers and also drawing. It's a commitment is what it is. Relocation is when you remove something from its intended audience and tuck it away somewhere in an area that's aimed at a different audience with the idea that the intended audience is less likely to find it. Restriction is when you require permission or you simply disallow access of material. The material is still there, but you either because you are too young or don't have a certain level of membership or whatever the reason might be, you are not allowed to access it. And then removal is what we're talking about when we say a book ban. And it's worth mentioning right now that the first three R's here are very often carried out overwhelmingly by librarians as opposed to the general public. So these are the censorship activities that librarians themselves engage in. The diaperings were very often at the hands of librarians going through their picture books and then putting them back on the shelf, etc. Certainly relocation and even restriction, because they are the ones in charge of those policies. Removal, the general public, parents, community members, those are brought to the library with an official challenge. They go through a reconsideration process, and then the book is either left on the shelf or it's removed. But everything else is mostly librarians doing it. I'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, some very depressing numbers for you. This is actually from the report that PEN America put out, I think this morning. And I'll just let you sort of absorb this. But yes, over 1,100 unique books were targeted between July of 2021 and March of 2022. That is 8 months. And for context, in 2018, 483 books were challenged. In 2019, 566. And in 2020, because everybody was stuck at home and didn't have time to march out and risk COVID to go put in a book challenge, it was 273. But even in our most robust recent years, we have doubled the number of challenges, more than doubled the number of challenges in less time, right? So we're on a fast track to not great. Some percentages here, and no surprise to anyone, hefty percentages of these challenges were of books that featured characters of color, themes of race and racism, characters and themes of queerness. And this is kind of new. I mean, it's not new. The challenging of history books that feature rights and activism is not new, but they are more heavily featured than usual. And it's not hard to sort of pull out some of the reasons why, right? Some of the backlash that's sort of happening. One thing I do want to mention here, the report also talks about how Texas is the state where most of these bans were happening, more than half of them. Upwards of 700. And this is significant because Texas as a state is the textbook market for the country. If you get a book banned in Texas, if you get legislation that says certain kinds of information are not allowed to be presented in educational materials for children, that will shape the content of your textbooks that are available in the country for every other state to use. Again, depressing. All right. So speaking of which, and I was going for a sort of not use the rod. Good Lord, spare the rod, spoil the child situation here. But either way, so these three books, Genderqueer, Lawn Boy, and All Boys Aren't Blue, are the top targets. They were the most banned books in that 8-month period that PEN America was reporting on, and they are also the top 3 banned books of 2021. So. Some buttons being pushed with these books, I guess. All 3 center queer characters, queer stories, queer themes, queer issues. And year after year, the top banned books and challenge books are those that feature queer characters, Black and brown characters living their lives. And always the top 10 banned books are children and YA books. And this is interesting, right? This is, well, it's not insignificant, right? It matters. It's by design. And there's reasons for it. In part because the Supreme Court, our Constitution, are actually not in favor of book bans, not fans, and have lots of things in place saying that you cannot do this. You cannot rip a book out of a school library simply because you disagree with it. You cannot impinge on the freedom, the intellectual freedom, and the right to access to information simply because you disagree with the ideas being shared. So how do you get around this if that is in fact your goal? Well, you do it for the children. Lots of great stuff being done in the name of doing it for the children. So children's and YA books, just like comics, have always been under heavy scrutiny because of how much they're written specifically for children. These terrible and super stressful themes are going to have that much more impact because it's written in a way that's so accessible. I'm terrified, get it away from them. And the idea sort of here is like, what exactly causes people to read a book and believe it's so inappropriate that they have to put time and effort into keeping other people, especially children and teens, from reading it. And it largely comes down to two things. Whose story is it, and how is it being told? Now, again, Supreme Court has said you can't just pull a book because you don't like who it's about or you don't like how it's told, but you can make a justified case for its removal based on things like age appropriateness. So this is right. You don't do this with adult books. You go after the books that are being aimed at kids, and it's mostly age appropriateness that we hear. And the move that you tend to see, one that you'll see a lot, especially with these books, is a conflation of all queer identities, all queer experiences, all queer issues with sexual content. That you can't talk about queerness. You can't have a queer person just standing in a room, looking in a mirror or looking at the ceiling without it being sexy times. So great. Then you make the argument that sex and sexual content is not age appropriate for whatever age we're talking about. And then you get to eliminate queer books and label queer students as inappropriate all in one go. Very efficient, as a matter of fact. And so we have a lot of speaking for the children that's happening to protect them. But at a heartening, I'll make a heartening note that the children are in fact taking the narrative back, which is very nice to see. They are appealing directly to administrators, school boards, and legislators, probably right now in another time zone. So that is good. But the method that's being used here is very old. This is an ancient playbook, and they are doing it again, and they are getting some ground, making some ground. So what are the stakes of this? If a healthy society doesn't ban books and our society's banning books, what's going on? And the stakes are big and conspicuous, and then, like I say, there's sort of some shadow situations where the community is one stake, right? That the library is meant to serve everyone, not simply the interests of particularly anxious parents. That the library's function is not to act in locus parentis, but to serve our community. That in fact parents should be acting as parents if they wish for a parental intervention in their child's reading. And I say the library serves the entire community, and I really should say it should serve the entire community. This is the part where I tell you the sad news that not every librarian is on our side, on the side of the angels, so to speak, in these particular battles. They engage in censorship practices, like I said before, with the self-censorship in this case being not buying the books, never letting them get on the shelves to be accessed, and therefore avoiding controversy. And this is an important point that goes beyond libraries. What we're seeing really is a very significant attack on the idea of controversy, that children, that readers, that society, the public, should not be incited to controversy, that controversy itself is the offensive sin that we need to punish, and label it as obscene to the point of it needs to be banned and removed. Not great, again, in an educational environment. Now, the other piece here, right? So controversy is the other problem. The other issue is contestation. Libraries have long been sites of contestation as a community service that is underfunded and yet handed more and more community roles. We are constantly a place to be contested. The problem that we see coming up here is that librarians themselves and librarianship are suddenly becoming the site of contestation. Suddenly we've got expertise of professionals who spent a lot of money to get a master's degree and training to do their jobs in school libraries, in public libraries. And that expertise is being undermined. Sometimes not even undermined, simply being circumvented. We're not even going to talk to the librarian, we're going to talk to the school board, and the school board's going to pull the book no matter what the librarian says. We've got practices and practitioners that are being criminalized. This is happening with, I'd call it nuisance legislation if it wasn't so scary. But library best practices in school libraries and the practitioners who are doing them are being criminalized, that you cannot make these kinds of materials available, let alone on purpose, and because you don't like the legislation, etc. And we also are now on a path, and I'll say on a path, but it's happening right now, where queer school librarians, Black youth services librarians, marginalized librarians are being contested on the basis of their identities. It has nothing to do with their expertise, their work, their role in their community or in their library. It is because they are these identities that are being banned in these books. All right, so super depressing. My good news is that there are many, many resources and many, many good people who are in this fight. So PEN America, like I said, did this report. It's called Banned in the U.S. Go and Google. It is a very depressing report, but it sort of crystallizes the issue in a way that makes it feel like you can get your arms around it and start pushing back. The National Coalition Against Censorship has the ongoing Kids' Right to Read project. It's been going for several years. I highly recommend the Youth Censorship database as a way to take a look at where these bans and challenges are happening. Are they happening in your backyard? I bet they are. They also have tons of toolkits of literally parents and community members, educators, et cetera. What do you do if a book in your classroom's been challenged? What do you do if you're trying to speak to a legislator, et cetera? And then, of course, as always, our stalwarts, the American Library Association, the Association of American School Librarians, and the National Council of Teachers of English are always there for the professionals that are being targeted along with these materials. And that's the end. Yeah.
Thank you so much to our panelists. That was so amazing. I couldn't even write down notes fast enough. I see that Roxana has a question. Roxana, do you want to unmute yourself and ask away?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you for this great talk. So I taught a banned books class in 2018, but it was a different climate, right? I'm in Texas at UT Austin. But just these bans, right? That was all circulating, right? But this has come to a head, right? Like lately, I guess under Biden, right? So kind of that pushback. And anyway, I'm interested in hearing if any of you had students bring up maybe cancel culture as kind of something, kind of a foil or something, right? Interesting, right? Because that's used by the right to label right, like left things when you cancel an author or something, right? And they seem to be, that seems like a really interesting conversation that never came up in my classroom. And I never thought to kind of bring that up, right? I never made that connection myself, but I'm wondering if that kind of term just circulates a lot more online and if that was something that maybe any of you kind of have encountered.
For me, our students are surprisingly not conservative in this area, which I mean, coming from Texas, and I went to college, I went to A&M, so I was in College Station, which, you know, this phrase is keep College Station normal, right? And so I remember when I got the job here, I went on the website, and there was on the official USI website was the day of silence with students with rainbow duct tape across their mouths on the official university website. And I was like, I found my home. But when students do ask about cancel culture, I put something in the chat that it's usually, why can't they just teach the book? Right, like that's always, I mean, my dad, who is conservative, asked me the same question, why can't you just teach the book? And they don't understand like what teaching a book means, right? And so I think like transparency, when some of this is happening boots on the ground, right? Like I argue with my dad every day and I'm trying bit by bit, right? And so I think that the cancel culture that the students sort of pay attention to, at least in my class, the worry about being canceled as a teacher, comes really in looking at how can they justify what they do in the classroom. So that's where I'm seeing cancel culture come in a little bit.
I think interestingly, and maybe I have students here, which is great and very, very endearing. So I have two who are currently in my Banned Books class who I found in the participants chat. So maybe I'm misremembering this because it's been the craziest semester on the face of the planet, but we haven't mentioned cancel culture at all. I don't think, at least not in the section that the two students I have who are in here, but they could correct me in the chat if they want, but I don't think so, which is interesting, right? Because these are students who are so engaged in digital culture that one would think that it would come up, but I'm wondering if because we're reading books that aren't themselves related to digital culture, that cancel culture sort of like it's ships passing in the night. That's sort of my thought, at least. And we certainly should talk about cancel culture, and you're correct. We'll talk about that next week. Remind me to bring it up in class. So that's my 2 cents, Roxana, but I think that's a really great question.
Yeah, Pete.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. It's good to see all of you and hear from our friends, colleagues, and Chris. So I have a question that I guess is a name. I was just hoping to hear some about teaching these courses in your curricula or shepherding these resources in the case of librarianship. In your departments, in your programs, in your institutions, how has support been, if there has been support, and how has backlash been handled? And to keep it even naughtier, I'm wondering if you have any tactics for supporting our colleagues who are doing this work when we might not be doing that work. Anything that people have done to help you or you wish people had done that we can take back to our own campuses. Thank you.
I'll go. Oh, Chris, did you want to go?
No, I'll collect my thoughts. You go.
Well, I never collect my thoughts, so that's always the problem, is I just vomit on a page and revise for 3 years. So like I talk as I write. We are very lucky that we have a Black president of our university who is working very hard on diversity initiatives on our campus, trying to diversify staff, trying to diversify the student population. And so we've had nothing but support. My students have been nothing but supportive of like teaching letting go of literary whiteness for the first time last semester. I had one student say I shouldn't have taught it on my evaluations, but everyone else it was their favorite book this semester. They talked over and over again about how important that book was to them. And I think for me, one of the things that is helpful is, and I said this in the chat, is bringing in guest speakers, because there's something like the authority of someone else in the classroom, right? Like it's not just you, it's someone else smart thinking the same things and saying the same things. So I brought our ethnic studies professor in, for example, to talk about decolonizing syllabi. And students really responded to that, right? Like, and it's nothing that I wasn't saying, but like she said it's smarter and better, right? So they seem to really gravitate towards that. So that would be my maybe piece of advice is like use the resources you have, right? Like use your multicultural centers, use your colleagues who do work in ethnic studies, multicultural, LGBT work, and have them really help you out. I think that for me anyway, in my class, that really worked.
I'm gonna agree with you, Amy. I think that drawing from those multiple perspectives to inform the need for studying banned books, right, is very key. Like, so I have an appointment in our ethnic studies department as well as I have in our English department. So I get to toe the line there. So, right, like you said, that pulling in those colleagues from those different fields helps illuminate things. I think that I am in a particular position of privilege in my position at my university because we're unionized. And so I would love to see them try to fire me for doing what I do. And I've said that before in front of students, and I have students here right now, and I'll say it again. I would love it if they try to fire me. That would just lawsuits, everything. This is also being recorded, so who knows where this is gonna go. Anyway, I don't really care. But I do think, right, that finding a coalition of both colleagues within your particular institution, whether that be in a library or high school, elementary school, university, college, right? Finding that community of people who will support you, who will go to bat for you, is what I would really recommend, and what I would push my students going into education to do. Most of my English students are English ed students. And so I will, like, you know, chain myself to the door of their school if someone wanted to get rid of them for teaching a banned book. But I think having a community who is supportive is the key here, whether they are offering silent support or whether they are go mobilizing and protest. But I think a lot of activism is about coalition building. And so I see that as being the core of ensuring that we can persist in teaching banned books without the more significant repercussions.
I guess I will say that I don't know, my student reactions, I am a white, straight, cis woman. So my students might have very different reactions to me teaching banned books than somebody from a different identity. And so I think that subject position does influence like perhaps my like authority or ability to be seen as credible by, you know, little undergrads. But also like I am a PhD student, so I do get worried about like if my students do get scared, like upset about topics. I mean, this week I taught something happened in our town and I had a student who was like, but what about the police perspective, right? Like, this is upsetting. What about the police? Like, and so, I mean, our classmates have that, we have that interactions guideline that we spent like 3 weeks creating at the beginning of the semester, where other students were able to refer back to it like, sure, but like this is a conversation that has been marginalized for so long, and they were able to like jump in on the conversation and not just leave it to me, which was what I was kind of like, I'm happy to take this for my students and like talk of like, you know, push back. But my students actually jumped in, which was really nice to have that. But I also used the faculty development office to kind of help create the course too. And then Gwen Tarbox is my mentor, so I think she'd go in fighting for me if something happened as well. So.
I don't know if I have a relevant or useful answer for this question, only to say there's something of an intersection of multiple things. So one, the majority of the children's literature program, and probably everywhere, but at my school, is white students. And in many cases, it's a graduate program in many cases. When they come and occasionally chat with me as their librarian for the program, I am the first Black librarian they've ever encountered, let alone had directly provide services to them. I think maybe that gives me a little like, oh, of course she's giving me all of these materials that center non-white characters, that center queer characters, that do these weird things when I'm sort of saying that I want to investigate this, you know, theoretical lens, etc. She's given me these books and these articles. So there's that piece, which is sort of like a greasing the wheels, so to speak. But there's also an aspect of my role for the program for Black and other non-white students, and I'd say also queer students, that I am the space that is not the classroom, that's not graded, where they can ask me what other kinds of resources there are. Is there anything that pushes back on this? This bugs me. Is there somebody that's, and there almost always is, which is great. And I get to point to, you know, some of the fine folks that are here today, as well as the other folks that are doing this work. It is also not insignificant from the position of the school, the smallness of the children's literature publishing world, etc. I also regularly talk to students about how their like fellow classmates, alums who also went through this program, looking at these books, asking these questions, getting this kind of uncomfortable, have gone on to be publishing professionals, to being authors, and some of them are producing banned books today, one way or another. And it matters. Yeah.
So we're over time. It's 8:07, and I'm conscious that people have other things to do. So feel free. I'm going to ask one last question because I'm selfish and I organize this and I want to. But if you need to leave, I appreciate you coming. And I just wanted to just give a specific shout out to Steve and Kelly, who are work with us at ChLA and were really helpful in organizing this. So I've been obviously thinking a lot about this, and I'm wondering what we all think about the difference. Sometimes books need to be removed from curriculum, right? And so how do we address that with students? Like, for example, one of my favorite books is To Kill a Mockingbird for very personal reasons. I would never teach it because I don't think that that's a book that really needs to be taught anymore. I would never discourage anyone from picking it up and reading it, but I think that there are so many other books written by authors of color that center the experiences of African American people, for example. But there are people that would fight me to the death on that, my father among them. So I'm just wondering if you all have any thoughts about that. Chris, you're like right away.
I do. So Sam and Ange, my two students who are in the banned books class right now, I'm going to shout them out because they came, and I am quite proud of them for that. But they will both know that I went on a tear at the beginning of the semester about Lolita and how I hate Lolita.
I hate that book.
It. Thank you, Marina. Thank you.
Awful.
I hate Lolita. I have a colleague who is a psychoanalyst who teaches it pretty much every semester, and I appreciate what she does, and it is never a thing that I will ever do nor advocate for. I think that Lolita, that's the line I draw in the sand. Nope, absolutely not. That's my hill to die on. I will not encourage anyone.
I will join you on that hill.
Or teach it. No. But also like you're saying, right? I love To Kill a Mockingbird. The film adaptation is like one of my go-to comfort films. But that's another one that I would never advocate for teaching. I would say for my English ed students, I would say, okay, here's some good comps, right? Same thing for like Catcher in the Rye, because I also hate Catcher in the Rye. Sorry, not sorry. But there are also some really great comps for like unreliable narrators, for boarding school stories, right? And so I think that there's a way to dodge these particular books that I think are sort of ingrained in the canon without like entirely having to engage with them, because I don't think that some of them are worth engaging with, like Lolita. So that's my very fiery 2 cents about this.
For me, for me, one of the assignments that my students do in my teaching lit class is pair a classic with a YA text. And so one of the things I found, like in the classroom, it's a way to like sort of ease out the classic. So if you wanted to teach To Kill a Mockingbird, pair that with The Hate U Give and see how the two texts talk to each other. And then eventually you can just reference the classic, which we can assume everyone eventually will read. And so it's actually, I have a former student who practices this in her classroom. She teaches every classic with a paired YA novel of non-white, non-straight authors. And she says she's had enormous success in the classroom with that.
I'll just quickly shout out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Disrupt Text, if anybody's familiar, is exactly that work, what Amy and what Chris just described. It is this idea, right, that the classics are not taught because the classics are musts, but because there are important themes to engage with, understanding how literature becomes literature, how it connects to cultural ideas, etc. And there are other books that do that, and books that maybe have a little bit more contemporary relevance, especially for teen readers, and folks who are looking to become new teachers of teen readers. And I think this is the same in LIS programs. You don't need to have To Kill a Mockingbird in your programming. You can find other books that are doing what you need it to do. If you want to have a book club that is everybody reads Harper Lee and that's it, just come and read Harper Lee, then that's fine. But that is probably the only situation in which case To Kill a Mockingbird has to be the book, that there is no other one that's going to do it. Everything else, there are other ways to approach similar narratives. There are other ways of looking at stories and centering different narratives and doing it. And all of that has equal value. And again, the book doesn't disappear because it's not on a syllabus. You don't have to teach it for me to have it in the library available for students who want to look at it, engage with it in their own research, bring it into conversation with the books you did assign. None of that disappears because of walking the talk in your classroom practices.
Yeah, that's an amazing point. Yeah. Are there any other questions? I'm watching for hands raised up. Thank you for all of the amazing book titles that people have put in the chat. I now have about 8 new books that I need to read. Oh, we have one last question. Jeannie or Jean, sorry if I mispronounced it.
It's Jean, it's okay. I think all of this is fantastic and wonderful, but I keep wondering about the perspective of the K-12 teacher who has to deal with the actual face-to-face confrontations with parents in school districts and the high probability that they could be fired, and they are being fired. So what do you tell K-12 education majors?
So I don't know if you were here, Jean, for
I was, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I had a student this past year who actually quit. She was they were trying to get her to quit, right? And they pushed her really hard to quit, and she has left the profession. I've had other students be challenged and have not left the profession and have managed to win. Those are students who are in public schools, and the public school superintendents tend to support, at least in this area, tend to support as long as you can prove why you're teaching it for a good reason. But they're scared. I mean, they're absolutely terrified. I have friends who are in the K through 12 system. I have a lot of my students stay in the area or go pretty close by, and they're all terrified. And so I don't necessarily have an answer for you, but I can tell you that they are very concerned about these things.
Right, because we're dealing with huge teacher shortages, and this whole, right-wing movement is, creating fewer teachers. And this is going to have huge reverberations in the future in our K-12 schools.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And when I talk with my English ed students, I try to position them to be empowered to teach things, particularly by people of color, not necessarily banned books, but the two are often the same thing at this time in the world. So I try to give them tools to teach those books as literature, right? And find the literary value in them rather than dwell on the banned nature of them, which is hard, right? Because they're gonna, face pushback anyway. And I feel this, particularly intimately. I said in a chat, my sister teaches 3rd grade ELA in Texas. And so I'm sort of tense awaiting a call one day, from my mom that says, hey, something's happened to her, right? And so that fear, I think, is really palpable. And unfortunately, right, in a socio-political climate that we have right now, there's only so much that we can do. But like I said about coalition building, I think it's really important for us, at least, people like me in my position where I teach students who are English ed majors, to go in and be an advocate for them, be a steady place for them to be able to reach back to and say, hey, I'm struggling with this. And then I get to come in and wield the fact that I have doctor in front of my name, and to push for them and to advocate for them, because I have that immense privilege. And so I find that that's what I can do, but it is a real struggle because I fear for my students all of the time. I have so many students whom I love who have gone into the teaching, the education system, and I'm afraid for them every day. And so all I can do, at least at the moment, right, is to be available and be supportive. And I know that that's kind of a crap answer, but that's what I have been trying to do in this particular moment.
And if I could just add on to what Chris was saying about the kind of the boots on the ground thing, is a lot of my students I had a student come in, she's very active in the teachers union, and she's been part of the Red for Ed protests happening at the Capitol in Indiana. And, I think using the union and utilizing that and getting that membership, your first paycheck, is one of the most important things students can do when they first start teaching, because the union is going to support you and any problems you might run into. So I had a student who came and talked to my class and was like, unionize, like, please join the union.
Yeah, I will say, as someone who lives in Canada, and the Ontario Teachers Union is a pretty significant entity, you see a lot, and I am American, I've been here for 13 years in Canada. You see a lot fewer book bans here. Not that they don't happen, but it's not to the same extent, for sure, right? This has been amazing. This has exceeded my expectations. I'm so thrilled with this. Thank you all, and thank you in particular to Kelly and Steve again for helping organize, and to our wonderful participants. I so appreciate it. Yeah, I hope to see so many more lovely faces at future conversations like this. Thanks, everyone.